Hi, this is Roger Green, executive producer and host of the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast. This week, over the holiday week, we will be sharing 5 conversations from episode 27, our coverage of last month's The Liver Meeting 2024. This conversation focused on broader issues of MASH therapy. It starts with Jeff McIntyre discussing a session that Mike Betel co-chaired at which he spoke on lifestyle management of MASLD and MASH. He said the first thing that was striking was the panel itself, lots of different perspectives, health systems, drug development, diet, exercise, commercial determinants of health. There was just a tremendous breadth of topic, and Robert Mitchell-Thain talked about the patient experience per se. So he felt that this was really a rich opportunity to take a look at the non-pharmacologic aspects of the meeting. And what he found particularly edifying is that he estimated that no more than 10% of the room were patients. The other 90%, and this was in a packed room, were providers or industry people trying to understand better how to support patients in general. I go on to note that I felt the same way about the Healthy Liver, Healthy Lives session we attended in terms of how many people were going to be there and how many wound up being from industry. Now, I sat in front, so I didn't see the meeting initially, but when I turned around later, the room was full. And again, this was not about drugs, but about the entire treatment paradigm and really the idea of preventive hepatology. At the end, Jeff goes on to say that he believes that it's not simply the result of more patient involvement in the study, but that right now, because we've got more drugs and because we're focusing on more issues, people understand the scale of the problem and that drugs alone aren't going to get it done. That said, I closed this session commenting that we see 6 different drug mechanisms presented in this meeting that appear likely to succeed, and in 5 years, we may have 4 or 5 different ways of treating the disease. Very, very exciting for everybody. Finally, I asked the group to describe what they feel will be different in the 2025 meeting. Answers vary widely, but all of them are enthusiastic and promise a really great future. As you listen, you'll hear all of our enthusiasm, which was infectious within ourselves, and we hope to those of you who are listening to this episode.
Jeff McIntyre.
I want to give a brief shout out to Michael, co-chaired a session, which I was really honored to be invited to speak at as well, about lifestyle management of MASLD and MASH. And the first thing that was really striking about it, was the panel itself. I mean, it just put together all these great perspectives of, I came in, I was asked to speak about larger sort of systems. And so I talked about, we talk about social determinants of health. Some people talk about commercial determinants of health. And I really got more into the regulatory determinants of health, of kind of how those decisions and the decisions that continue today and the processes today impact all these other areas, and the rise of obesity, the rise of chronic disease, a lot of the things that we're dealing with downstream right now as well. Robert Mitchell-Thain was brought in as a patient to talk about his individual experience, which is always enlightening. If you've heard Robert talk, you know that he presents in a great way and can give a great personal testimony and the struggles that he's been through. Jennifer Lai from UCSF came in and was just really great with, presenting both the science, but also presenting a very practical approach on how to approach many of the decisions and the lifestyle management sort of strategies that you can do. I'm still hearing she has an 80-30-10 idea about, 80% of your nutrition should come from plants, roughly 20 to 30 different plants a day, and then 10 minutes of activity after eating. It's not perfect, which she'll tell you, but it's something that gets you started. And so it was really great food for thought, no pun intended in that as well. And then Meena Bansal, followed up kind of highlighting all of the posters that were relevant to this at the session that people could then talk about. And she emphasized, I think, 3 or 4 or 5, I forget how many she actually did, but she had to, to show that there's really concurrent and consistent research that is still happening in this area. And it's an area where we have some answers, but not necessarily conclusions. And there's always improvement and room to grow and whatnot as well. As I was about to say, I think one of the first things that struck me on this is I've done several of these sort of things, and 9 times out of 10, as someone who speaks on this topic regularly, we come into the room and it's 10 people who we're probably related to or from our organization, and they've brought an intern, and we're meeting in a closet in a adjourning building at 6 a.m., up against the opening session. It's just somewhere we've always gotten kind of sidelined and marginalized into these sort of things. And we walked into that room and holy cow, there were a couple of hundred people there, standing room, lining the walls. We had people standing 4 and 5 deep at the microphone to be able to ask questions about practical strategies, about, what they can do on the local area, the arena. I just think it just felt really tremendous as someone who has come to this area from population and public health to see that sort of outpouring so we can begin to put holistic treatment together for patients. It was just, I was thrilled to be a part of it and really want to thank Mike publicly here for involving me in that.
Mike Betel.
We could have had a bigger room and it probably would have been full too. It was crazy. You did a great job as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Roger Green.
I felt the same way about the Healthy Liver, Healthy Lives session in terms of how many people I thought were going to be there and how many people wound up being there. No, I did the Mike Betel thing. I got there early and sat in the front. So I didn't really, when I got there weren't very many people. And all of a sudden, we got on Q&A and I turned around. The room was full. People were on the walls on all sides. I think it was interesting the degree to which there was an interest in this meeting, not merely about the drugs, but about the entire treatment paradigm and the role that everybody had to play in order to get real about how do we treat MASLD and MASH. I thought that was, in general, fantastic. We're way past our deadline, so I'll take other comments. I'm just letting you know I'm not going to present anything today because you guys have done great. Jeff, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say one thing that I think it would be easy to kind of say that this is a result of more patient involvement in ASLD. There were certainly a lot of patients that were there, but from where we were sitting on the stage to be able to see who was there and who was lining up against the wall, it was by and large providers, clinicians, and industry. I mean, I think that the patient population that was in that session was maybe 10% or so. And so it was really heartwarming to see how can, that providers are coming in and they're struggling with this question of, telling patients do something more than just, watch what you eat and lose some weight, but actually getting practical strategies and understanding the bigger picture and how that may be impacted as well. It was just really heartwarming to see, finally beginning to see some of the complete picture come together for them.
Yeah. And then my only comment on Healthy Liver, Healthy Lives was going to be watching who asked questions. The questions came from people like primary care docs, program administrators and program leads at different VA sites and state government. I think you're right. I mean, the breadth with which people are interested in managing the overall disease has flourished. I think, frankly, part of that's about after resmetirom. You get a drug approved, everybody pays more attention. But part of that's also simply about the discussion about how big the problem is. And people have been talking about the scale of the problem for long enough that folks are starting to pay attention. So with that, I will tell you that one of my comments was going to be, and this is really simple, there was a late breaker session that talked about six different drugs, four different modes of action, and none of that was resmetirom. Now, one, the Essence trial was SEMA, and the others were all things that were in development. So I think that moment spoke to me to the breadth of what's being developed right now. It's conceivable that we could see over the next 5 years, 3, 4, 5 different modes of action. Well, 4 or 5 different modes of action in the available to treat in the U.S. and probably not a lot less than that in Europe. Europe's a year behind, so it feels like we're on the edge of a whole new era. With that, and noting the whole new era, let me go to the last question. What do you think you'll see next year, and how will it be different than what we saw this year, besides the weather, Washington versus San Diego?
Naim Alkhouri.
I'm excited about the readout of 3 trials in the MASH cirrhosis population that we are expecting in Q1 of next year. So, this has been the highest unmet need. And unfortunately, we don't have anything that's FDA approved, and we will not get there for the next few years. But we are expecting the readout of the Gilead trial that used the combination of semaglutide from Novo with 2 of the Gilead drugs, firsocostat and cilofexor. We are also expecting the readout from the Akiro Symmetry trial. This will be the 96-week data for cirrhotics. And then finally, also, we should hear the results from Galectin with belapectin. This was a unique patient population focused on patients with MASH and clinically significant portal hypertension. And the endpoint was development of varices on endoscopy, so unique endpoint based on endoscopy, not histology or labs or outcomes. And I think, if any of these ones, is positive, I think this would be great news for our patients, and I suspect they'll take them to phase 3. Last thing I want to say is, I was also very intrigued by several sessions on MetALD, which is a new category that we have in the nomenclature that combines MASLD plus ALD light, if you would like to say. And I think there's a lot of interest in, validating biomarkers and designing clinical trials and trying to understand the natural history of this population. And I suspect more to come on this. And we have the Emerging Topic Conference, ASLD Emerging Topic Conference, that's taking place in Las Vegas, I think between February 27th to at the end of the month, and I think we'll hear more about ALD, MASLD, and Meta-ALD. So I encourage the audience to register for this meeting. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I should note that our current plan is actually to be there and to cover it as one of our major topics next year. And stick around; I'll talk about how this podcast is going to change. You'll understand what a major topic means. But good point. Next. What's different? What will be different next year?
Jörn Schattenberg.
We're going to be seeing a lot of real-world experience on using a resmetirom, and after conditional approval for SEMA comes in, mostly from the US though, we'll get real world experience. And I think that's always very useful in terms of moving outside of the highly specified trial population. We're having, so I'm very excited for that. And of course, there's a lot of mechanisms that are currently development. So the FGF21s, I'm interested to learn where they're going, because they seem to be powerful on the liver, albeit not being the most promising in the pure diabetes field. And I find it interesting to see that there's so much efficacy for liver. So interested to see where that road leads us.
I'll speak from the patient with the patient voice. I think that there will be, I know that there will be further enrichment in the quality of the meetings that we have and the speakers, because we just had a taste of it this year and it was fantastic. So I'm sure next year has got to be better. We have to raise the bar. And congratulations, to the organizers at ESLD. They did a great job this year.
I'll say, wow, I can't get excited enough. I'm super interested to see what this FDA corner is going to be like next year, as we'll be several months into a new administration, and who's there, who's not, and just kind of what the definition of things are. We're going to have a whole host of new kind of political realities, I think, thrust upon us, in which we're going to have to navigate. There's been a lot of doomsaying, I think. There's a lot of potential for, at the FDA, there's been interesting conversations around a lot of the things that we used to talk about with the Obama administration around, food processing and ultra-processed food and its impact on the population. But in this instance, what does it mean for drug approval? What does it mean for clinical trials? There's all these areas where there are suspicions. We have seen already that one of the nominee's lawyers has filed a suit against the polio vaccine, but because that was such a dramatic headline, what was lost in that is that same lawyer also filed a suit against the hepatitis vaccine as well. And so I think we're going to see the political aspect of the United States is really going to be a through line that gets more involved in some of these conversations next year.
Now, are you excited as a patient advocate or as an observer of government behavior during times of stress?
Repeat that, please.
Are you excited as a patient advocate or as someone who's fascinated by change in government and what happens during periods of stress and dislocation in the government?
Roger, it's one of those things of the more they change, the more they stay the same. And so excited might be an overstated way of addressing that. But, interesting times. And so it's this is the work that we have to do, is to be able to work in these environments, to be able to make change happen, to be able to build bridges. And again, I think the environment is one that is set up to where it's going to be the patient's voice that makes the difference. Anytime you see a political movement that rises out of populism like this, then ultimately that's something that's going to come from the voices, on the ground. And I think there's a real role for patient advocacy in what could be a very challenging environment.
Yeah, I think that's a complete statement that could be parsed for at least the next half hour, but we're not going to do that. Yeah, but here's my flip side, which is that I think next year we're going to start to see all these forces come together. Right now, so far we've got made major advances in terms of what we're willing to talk about in each of these areas individually. But I think it was whose ever comment it was that we're going to see the practical effects of Resdifra and of conditional approved SEMA, and we're going to have real world experience, and we're going to see how that starts to play into patient interaction and everything else. I think we can do a much better job of getting a 360-degree view of what we have to do next than we've had to do so far, because we haven't had the pieces in place to ask the questions. So I'll be really intrigued to see how that comes together.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmash.com. Over the rest of the holiday, we'll be sharing conversations from episode 25, in which Maru Ranella went over expert recommendations on use of resmetirom, and also a conversation Jörn and I recorded with Scott Friedman last summer that never made it to air. Plenty to listen to while you're at home and away. And we'll be back in January covering MASH-Tag and then moving into our new 2025 Surfing Mash V2.0 format. Take care, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.